does violence begin? Is it inherent in human nature, or is it a condition that's learned? I have looked at a lot of works. I digest a lot of works. Friedrich Engels, for example, The Role of Force in History. I've looked at Robert Audrey's Territorial Imperative and African Genesis. I've digest a tremendous amount of literature in search of an answer to the question of where does violence develop in the human condition. And I've come to the conclusion that the distinction we posit between animality and humanity is a false distinction. That humanity is basically a secularized religious concept. The idea that humankind is in some way a thing apart, and that all other living beings are animals, but we are a thing apart, is quite false. We have a set of canines, and I would urge you to think about what that implies. You know, the study of human origins, particularly as it's focused on fossils and skeletal remains, show that the canines get longer as you go back in time. And we know that all animals that have canines are meat eaters. And you can't be a meat eater unless you're a killer, because you have to kill your prey. And it dawned on me that the same violence that little hunter-gatherer clans wreaked on each other over hunting grounds is the same violence that they employ in hunting and killing animals. There's only one violence in human society, and that's the violence that emanates from an aspect of human nature. We are related to other animals. We are primates. And recently, I think maybe even a week ago, they made an amazing discovery in the Transvaal of northern South Africa. They discovered these fossils, and they were complete. This is the first time that they have found complete human fossils. They have always found parts of a skeleton, part of a skull, but here they have found, fossils that are complete, and it suggests that the remains in the cave that they excavated represent a burial site. And that suggests the idea that people over 100,000 years ago buried their dead. They didn't just leave their remains. And when they studied the fossil remains, they noticed that the hands and the feet were identical to modern human beings, unlike other hominid fossils that they found. And the canines were there. And it's fair to say that they were meat eaters. Vegetarians don't have canines. They don't need canines. They have mainly molars, and their dentures suggest a diet of plant eating, grounding. Canines are for tearing, ripping, holding. Imagine a lion jumping on your back and sinking his canines into you. He's going to rip you apart. So I'm suggesting that violence in here, in the human condition, is not inevitable. And I say that because our development is the result of an evolutionary process. We have evolved from a lower stage to a higher stage. And that enables us to be able to differentiate things on the basis of social considerations. We are social animals. There has never been a time when human beings were singular. Imagine leaving a baby. It's dead. You have condemned it to death. And you find this with other primates. You find it amongst chimpanzees, orangutans. They are very social, and they take care of their young. And the period of infancy is analogous to that of infancy in human childhood. We know that a lot of the qualities we ascribe to human nature or humanity are socially determined. For example, language is learned, is not an innate behavior. It is learned. The study of isolated children show a strange deformation. You know, they reveal or evince nothing of human nature. They can't walk, they can't talk. You say, what happened to their human nature? Well, they were isolated. And so they didn't develop what we come to associate with human nature. So this is the context in which we have to consider violence. You know, yes, we can control it. War is not inevitable. You know, and again, this goes back to our evolution, and we are quite developed. You know, we know that chimpanzees eat meat. We know they hunt. We know they make primitive tools. This suggests evolution. Orangutans don't do that. So we know that there are different types of primates that have that are located at different levels on the evolutionary ladder. We happen to be at the top of the evolutionary ladder when it comes to primate behavior. And so we can control our violence, but it's there. There's no question about it. Sigmund Freud located violence, and I should just point out that when I use the term Sigmund Freud, I hope people don't react negatively, because there are attitudes that are unfounded about Freud's work. A lot of people have not studied Freud, but yet they have opinions about Freud. And most people attribute his pansexualism to Freud. That is definitely not a part of his work. And that is not to say he does not emphasize the sexual instinct. Without the sexual instinct, you have no survival instinct, because that allows you to reproduce. So there's definitely a sexual instinct. And he locates violence in the sexual instinct of male species. Not to say that females cannot be violent. You know, lions show that females can be quite violent because they hunt. But males have a type of violence that eludes females in all divisions of the animal kingdom. They go beyond simply hunting. They kill other animals, they protect the pride, and they kill each other. There's no doubt about it. Like a lion will kill another lion to take over the pride and kill the babies. Females don't do nothing like that. You know, and again, I would urge you to think about the role that females have played in history as violent actors. In Ethiopia, or ancient Kush, there was a dynasty of queens, warrior queens. And, you know, they contend with the Romans. The Romans wrote about these women. You know, Queen Amenetia rode an elephant. She had one eye. She led her troops into battle. You know, and even in Europe, there were warrior queens. So women can be violent. Ex Golda Meir. You know, she was quite violent. So I'm not suggesting that women cannot be violent, but it's a different violence than what men are associated with, or the males. That opens the way for the discussion of George Sorel and Frantz Fanon. They represent two poles of the same, you know, theory. Sorel argues that it is possible to look at certain ideas like natural rights, for example, and I'm sure most of you have heard the term natural rights. The right to life is said to be a natural right. But I pose the question, does natural rights only apply to human beings, or does other animals in the animal kingdom have a natural right to life? Does a lion violate the right to life of a zebra when he sinks his fangs into him? I think nature is more concerned with survival than morality. You know, we say those things that are just are good, those things that are unjust are bad, but these are moral concepts. Good and bad is the essence of doctrines of morality. Nature do not deal with morality. Again, nature deals with survival. And I hate to use the Darwinian term, the survival of the fittest, which is not really a Darwinian term. It's a term that's, you know, attributed to him. Darwin speaks of the survival of the species. You know, and of course, that's a different idea than what's associated with Herbert Spencer, who developed the idea of social Darwinism. You know, the idea that some kind of way what we observe in the animal kingdom is universal. You know, and that you know, it's possible to take you know, to separate humans from other animals, but that we must bear in mind, you know, the similarities. Social Darwinism tells us that, for example, only the fittest survive. And the fittest, that idea of the fittest can be transposed to human society. Europeans claim that they are on top because they are the fittest. So in a way, you know, and Spencer was a good Englishman, you know, he was very much a product of his time, and he saw the English aristocracy as being at the apex of human development. And so the idea of social Darwinism was meant to explain the concept of aristocracy and the concept of conquest. And of course, we know that Freud, that's not what but that's not what Darwin dealt with. But anyway, Sorel was concerned to point out that what morality does is it creates a certain unity, you know, within human community around certain ideas. At one time, it was considered quite ethical to blow your nose and shake hands with a person, but at a certain point, that became unethical, you know, because with the development of the germ theory of disease, that was definitely taboo. So, ethics is something that is socially determined. It does not exist in nature. It's a product of human society. So when we look at violence, you know, we know that violence, you know, has ethical applications, because some people speak of just wars, and that's things we agree on. Some people speak of unjust wars. So Sorel was concerned with the ethical uses and the tactical uses of violence. Let me read a little something. That's the next part of my presentation. It's a little note that I had to jot down on Fanon, because Fanon can be quite complex. But before I do this, I want to point out that Fanon was unique in pointing out that neurosis had a social component, unlike psychosis, which is purely physiological. There's a neurotic component to, you know, neuroses. And Tasha and I were rolling. She was dropping me off somewhere, and we, you know, were talking about the black people that we noticed wandering the streets. And Donald was, why us? Why, you know? Well, capitalism have had a very, very profound effect on people that it has conquered, like Native Americans, the problem with alcoholism, the problem with drugs, the problem with, you know, prostitution. This refers, these neurotic illnesses are socially determined. And, you know, capitalism have wreaked violence on people of color. You know, go to Australia and look at Australia. They have all types of inferiority complexes. I was looking at a documentary from South Africa called 21 and Up. You know, it's a study of those that were born after the apartheid era. They introduced a little boy, and he wanted to marry white women because white people were prettier. This is just a reflection of the psychological or the social psychological effects that Western conquests have had on people of color. And it has had a particularly devastating impact on black people because, of course, Native American people were conquered. There's no doubt about it. But they would not in any way reduce the property.
Right.
You know, the Catholic Church opposed that in Mexico. The encomienda system prevented that. But blacks were property in Mexico and throughout Latin America. So, you know, we have bared the brunt of Western conquest, and it manifests itself in the various types of neurosis that exist in our community. And we know that prior to the development of capitalism, the neurotic illnesses that capitalism has created didn't exist in pre-capitalist society. At least there's no recorded reference to these types of illnesses. You know, most people belong to their communities. And their community was their world, it was their life. But with the breakup of the little communities and the emergence of urbanism, you know, neurotic illnesses started developing. But capitalism was already in force in effect. Let me read you what Fanon has to say about violence, because it has a lot to do with us and other people of color who have been conquered by Western imperialism. Okay, in the context of the colonial dispensation, Fanon saw violence on the part of the oppressed masses not only as necessary, but also as therapeutic. For him, violence was an act of pure catharsis, because it was through the unceremonious imposition of violence that the oppressed masses were stripped of their freedom and dignity, and only through the judicious counter-use of violence can these rights be restored. In Fanon's view, the spilling of the blood of the hated conqueror was analogous to the spilling of the blood of the sacrificial lamb. It had redemptive value, or to use the Bible passage, there can be no redemption without the shedding of blood. For all these reasons, therefore, the spilling, or to be more precise, the lavish spilling of the blood of the conqueror is the sine qua non for the liberation of the oppressed masses. So it's only through violence that the oppressed can discover themselves and their lost humanity, their humanity that's been denied. And with the killing of the oppressor, it becomes quite evident to the oppressed that the oppressor can bleed.